All right, everybody, welcome in. We are going deep today on something pretty amazing.
Yeah,
Something that, you might think is simple, but as we're going to find out, is actually super complex and fascinating.
absolutely.
We're talking sourdough bread.
Yeah.
We've got a bunch of really interesting sources here that delve into its history and,
Mm.
the science behind it and the key people who have, kind of shaped sourdough over the centuries.
It's a long history.
It is a long history.
Yeah.
So what we really want to do is kind of go beyond just like, the basics of like, oh, sourdough's good for you. And
Right.
like, it's tangy and all that
Right,
stuff.
right.
We really want to find out, what makes it tick, what
Yeah.
makes it special, what makes it so much more than just like any other bread.
Exactly. And, for those of you out there who are like me, you love, the flavor and,
Yeah,
the artisanal aspect of it all. I think this is going to be really exciting.
I think so too. There are going to be some real like aha moments, I think, for people listening along.
For sure.
So to kick things off, one of the things that really jumps out from the research is just how ancient this is.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, we're talking way before commercial yeast,
Absolutely.
way before you could just go to the store and buy a packet.
Right.
So, we throw this term around sourdough starter, but can you actually break down for us what that is?
Yeah. So a sourdough starter, it's like a little pet.
Okay.
You've got to feed it. You've got to take care of it. But really, it's a living culture
Okay.
of wild yeasts and bacteria. And they kind of hang out in this mixture of flour and water.
Huh.
And that's what gives sourdough its unique characteristics. It's that tangy flavor.
Okay, so it's not yeast that you buy in the store.
No, no.
It's these like wild yeasts and bacteria
Yeah,
that
exactly.
are just kind of, floating around in the air.
In the air, exactly. And, it's so fascinating because the earliest evidence we have of sourdough bread goes all the way back to ancient Egypt,
Wow.
like 1500 BC.
That is ancient.
I know, it's crazy. So for centuries, that was just the way people made bread,
Wow.
relying on these natural yeasts and bacteria in the environment.
Totally different from the, controlled process we have today.
Totally different.
That's incredible.
It is.
Now, one of the other things that really surprised me was that,
Yeah.
we know that sourdough's been around for a long time, but it seems like the Gold Rush era in San Francisco
Right?
really kind of cemented its place in, American culture at least.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. And, the sources talk about how the San Francisco Bay Area has this like unique microbial environment.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and it really contributed to that distinct flavor profile that we associate with San Francisco sourdough.
Oh, wow.
But I think also just the nature of the gold rush. You had all these people coming to this one area
Mm-hmm.
and they needed food that would last.
Right.
And sourdough is perfect for that.
Yeah, it keeps for a long time.
Exactly, it does. So it became a staple for the miners.
Makes sense.
And I think that association just stuck.
Yeah, it's like the official bread of San Francisco.
Right? It's so interesting how a place can impact the flavor of something.
Right. You wouldn't think about that normally.
Right? Turn it into something so iconic.
Exactly.
It really makes you think about other foods and, how their regions have shaped them.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've got this, this long history. We've talked about the ancient Egyptian.
Mhm.
We've talked about the gold rush. But there are also some key figures that kind of stand out in the history of sourdough.
Absolutely.
And one that our sources mentioned was Isidore Boudin.
Oh, yeah.
Can you tell us a bit about him?
Oh, absolutely. So Isidore Boudin, he founded Boudin Bakery in San Francisco
Oh, wow.
in 1849. And what's really amazing is that they've maintained the same sourdough starter
Wow.
since then.
That's incredible.
Like for generations, they've kept that going.
That's like a piece of living history.
It really is. And I think it speaks to that legacy of sourdough.
Yeah.
It's not just bread, it's tradition.
Absolutely. And then, moving a little closer to our time,
Yeah.
our sources also talk about Chad Robertson and his book, Partine Bread,
Yeah.
which really seems to have had a huge impact on home bakers.
Absolutely. I mean, Chad Robertson, he kind of demystified sourdough for the everyday person.
Yeah.
Before it was like this mysterious thing.
Right.
But he made it approachable.
Okay.
He focused on the fundamentals, like the feel of the dough,
Mm.
the different stages of fermentation. And he really emphasized, high hydration in the dough
Okay.
and specific techniques for shaping and baking.
Mm-hmm.
So home bakers could really get those professional-looking loaves.
Like those beautiful Instagram-worthy loaves.
Exactly, exactly. And I think he really bridged that gap between, those old traditions
Yeah.
and what people could actually do in their own kitchens.
Right.
And I think that's a big part of why sourdough is so popular now.
Yeah. It feels more doable.
Yeah,
Not so intimidating.
exactly.
So we've talked about the history, the people.
Mm-hmm.
Now let's get into some of the more like surprising, quirky things that
Yes.
make sourdough so unique.
Okay.
And one that I was just like blown away by was the idea that sourdough starters can be passed down
Oh, yeah.
through generations, like family heirlooms.
I know, isn't that amazing?
That's wild.
Because there are these living ecosystems, they can literally live indefinitely
Really?
if you take care of them.
So you could have like your great-great-grandmother's sourdough starter.
Exactly. And it's like this culinary connection until the
Wow,
past.
that's so
Isn't
cool.
it? It's like having a little piece of history.
In your kitchen.
Yeah,
That's amazing.
it is.
Now, one of the things that people always talk about with sourdough is the tangy flavor.
Right.
Where does that come from?
So that tankiness, it comes from lactic acid and acetic acid,
Okay,
which are produced during fermentation.
got it.
And the lactic acid gives you this kind of smoother tang,
Okay.
kind of like yogurt.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then the acetic acid is sharper,
Okay.
more like vinegar.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the balance between those two
Yeah.
is what gives you all those complex flavors that people love.
That's so interesting.
And there's actually a health benefit to that fermentation process, too.
Oh, really?
It can lower the glycemic index of the bread.
So it's better for your blood sugar
Yeah. Okay.
compared to like regular bread.
Exactly.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so it's delicious and potentially a bit healthier.
I like that combination.
Who doesn't?
Now, I also loved this little tidbit that I found, which is that the term sourdough
Mm-hmm.
actually comes from the Klondike Gold Rush miners.
Oh, yeah, tell me about that.
So apparently the miners, they relied so heavily on sourdough bread
They did.
that they were nicknamed sourdoughs
Oh, wow.
because they always carried their starters with them
Oh, that's cool.
so they could make bread wherever they went.
I love that.
Isn't that cool?
It is really cool. It just shows you how essential sourdough was
Yeah.
to their lives.
Yeah, like a true staple.
A true staple.
Yeah. So I think it would be helpful to kind of recap everything we've talked about
Okay.
and put it into a clear timeline.
Yeah,
So just to give everybody a good overview.
absolutely. So, as we said, sourdough goes all the way back to ancient Egypt, around 1500 BC.
Okay,
That's our first record of it.
got it.
And then during the Middle Ages in Europe, sourdough was the main way people made bread.
Okay.
Then we jump ahead to 1849, a big year for American sourdough.
Oh, yep.
That's when Boudin's Bakery opens in San Francisco.
Right. And then what?
Then we have a little bit of a quiet period
Right.
until the 1960s and 70s,
Okay.
when there's this revival of artisanal bread making.
Gotcha.
People are getting back to those traditional methods
Mm-hmm.
and really appreciating flavor.
Yeah.
And sourdough kind of gets swept up in that movement.
Makes sense.
And then from the 2000s to now,
Yeah.
we've seen this explosion of home baking
Absolutely.
tied to the slow food movement.
Yep.
And just this desire for more authentic, handcrafted food.
Mm-hmm.
And sourdough fits right into that.
Totally.
Yeah.
So after all of this research and everything that we've talked about,
Yeah.
what do you think is the core takeaway?
You know, I think the biggest thing is that sourdough baking is this beautiful blend of art and science,
Okay.
is deeply rooted in tradition, but it's always evolving.
Mm-hmm.
You know, people are experimenting with new techniques and interpretations.
Right.
And it does require patience
Yeah.
and a willingness to kind of experiment because every starter is different.
Right. Every environment is different.
Exactly. But the rewards are huge.
Mhm. Yeah.
You get incredible flavor,
Mm-hmm.
potential health benefits,
Yep.
and I think just this real sense of satisfaction
Yeah.
when you create something so fundamental with your own hand.
Yeah, you're not just buying a loaf of bread, you're
Exactly.
creating something special.
You are.
Yeah.
You're tapping into something ancient,
Totally.
and it's delicious.
It is delicious, so I think it's safe to say that sourdough baking is much more than just a trend.
Right.
It's a rich and rewarding practice. It's been around for centuries, and I think it's going to be around for a long time to come.
I agree. And it makes you wonder, in our world today where everything is so fast-paced,
Right.
why are people drawn to something so slow and deliberate?
That's a good question.
Maybe it's that connection to history
Mm-hmm.
or the amazing science behind it.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's just the simple joy of making something delicious
Yeah.
from scratch.
Yeah.
Whatever it is, I think it's worth exploring.
I think so too.
Maybe it's time to start your own sourdough journey.
Yeah, why not?
See what all the fuss is about.
Thanks for joining us, everybody.
Yeah, this was fun.
We'll see you next time for another deep dive.
Bye.